He's here today, and glad to be here myself. Happy Father's Day to whom Father's Day that greeting is due. And we're continuing this morning from verse 8 of chapter 13 of Romans. Romans 13, verse 8. We briefly dealt with it last week as we were finishing up the class session. And it's the reason I want to review it again this morning because it introduces the following verses. As we look at verse 8, owe no man anything but to love one another. And we discussed about this is about paying our debts, taking care of the what we owe, and it is not condemning the use of credit for the purpose of credit. But yeah, as we take out a loan and create debt, as long as we continue, we make timely payments, we are paying what we are not owing any man anything. We're current, okay? But the one thing we do want to owe, as an ever-present debt, is that to love one another. In fact, this is what introduces the next section. And as he says, for he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. And he's talking about the law of Moses. Remember, I discussed briefly Jesus was asked, which is the greatest law? He says, love your God, love Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength. And the second is like unto it, to love your neighbor as yourself. And upon these are the whole law based. The whole law of Moses is based upon these two principles, commandments. And so as we think about the law of Moses is based on that, I thought that was a bunch of regulations and rituals and things. And well, Jesus said, no, the whole law is based on it. And we see Paul discusses this very thing. In verse 9, for this thou shalt not commit adultery. If you think about it, if you love your neighbor, you're not going to compromise the virtue of your neighbor's wife. Okay. Regardless of your neighbor's wife's disposition, you don't compromise the virtue of your neighbor's wife if you love him. So you love your neighbor as yourself. Thou shalt not kill. Well, if you love your neighbor, you're not going to murder him. Thou shalt not steal. Likewise, thou shalt not bear false witness. Certainly, I can think of nothing more. It's one thing to steal possessions from your neighbor, and of course that is not love. It deprives him of his time in life. You think about that. To steal from your neighbor or anybody else is to deprive him of the time he spent in accruing the necessary resources to purchase whatever item you've stolen. Okay, and so you're not just stealing the item, you're stealing his time, and we know that time is irreplaceable. As we go through life, there's no replacing what the past. Thou shalt not bear false witness. Now, to me, bearing false witness is more damaging to an individual. It hurts deeper, cuts deeper than stealing his possessions. To bear false witness, to lie about him, lie about events. And it shows two things. When one is willing to bear false witness against his neighbor or anyone else, of course, we know who is your neighbor. Who is your neighbor? Well, how do you know that? Remember the parable of the Good Samaritan? Okay. What is the relationship between Samaritans and the Jew at that time? They get along. Why? Why didn't they get along? Yes, but when the Assyrians came in and invaded the northern kingdom of Israel, in their conquest, in their victory, part of the Assyrians, just the Romans followed the same suit, but also the Babylonians did the same thing. What they would do is they would displace the people, the citizens of that nation, and bring in people from other nations to bring in. So they'd intermix all these so that it would reduce the probability and the risk of rebellion. You diminish the leadership of those who would rebel. You diminish the coordination they would have. You just spread them across your kingdom, and they don't have the strength, concentration of power. And so that was a practice. And so what happened, of course, was you had Gentiles being intermixed with the Jews that were in the nation of Israel. And they did intermarry. They had children. And you had a mixed breed. And it wasn't so much they were mixed blood. It was more, what was their religious practices? And, you know, we know that the scriptures teach that all mankind come from God. Whatever race, whatever nationality you are, we all come from God. So whatever our physical appearance would be, our physical traits, we all still come from God. And you know, the Bible teaches that the life is in the blood. And it's talking about basically the sacrifices that they would make, that Christ made basically. The life is in the blood. And so all of our life, we know about the circulation regarding just oxygen being brought to all our cells, all the nutrients being brought to our cells, and all the toxins being removed from our cells and to be eliminated from our body. Okay, so we know that the blood is the life current, I guess you could say. It's the carrier of life to all of our cells in that respect. And you know that if you take the blood of one ethnic group and you take the blood of another ethnic group and you compare them, at the microscopic level, you can't tell the difference. There's no difference, no distinction between the blood, whether it be AB positive, negative, O positive, O negative. You can see those types, but that's the distinguishing factor of the blood. But there's no distinguishing factor in the blood of nationalities, the blood of ethnic groups. Of course, if you go down to the deeper level, into the chromosomes, into the genes, and you start analyzing that, you may find differences there. But I would venture to say that you couldn't necessarily tell the ethnic group from which this blood came, unless it carried some certain degenerative trait, like what do they call it, leukemia or yes, and that's still probabilities there. Okay, so the point being that ethnically speaking, there's no difference between any of us. But as far as the Samaritans and the Jews, it wasn't just that they were commanded not to marry wives from the people that surrounded them. They were to marry only among themselves. The Israelites were to marry only among themselves. And it wasn't just because so their blood would be pure. Okay, that's what not it was about either. It was about the influence that the nations around them would have with particularly the spiritual influence. And they were warned that if they start intermarrying among the people, that giving their daughters to the local people and marrying the daughters of the local people, that the influence of the local people would come into the nation of Israel, and it would pervert their resolve to serve God and Him only. We see Solomon as an example that his being so affluent and influential in the world, his being so wise, yet for whatever reason he chose to marry wives from all over the nations. Okay, whether it was political, or what do they call it? To try to get along and iron over the rough spots with other nations around. He still married quite a number of wives that were pagan, heathen. And it influenced him that he would build temples for his wives so that they could practice their idolatry. And that influence came into the nation of Israel as well. As wise as Solomon was, there are some things he just didn't get. And so that was the reason why they were not to intermarry with people outside. It was because it would pervert and influence them with their spiritual dedication to God. So as they did intermarry then in the northern kingdom, they became known. This mixed blood became known as the Samaritans, but with it brought also the influence of the pagan religions. And you also consider during the times of the northern kingdom, with Jeroboam being the first king, that he introduced false doctrines. He introduced false worship. He introduced he changed the place of worship. He changed the item of worship. He actually had an idol created, image created. He changed the time of their worship, the times that they were to go to observe certain feasts. And he also changed the priesthood itself. So no longer was that of the Levitical priesthood, but it was his own priesthood. So he perverted the worship as well. And so with all this influence there, you see that the Samaritans had a perverse view about their worship. It's not perverse. It is errant, okay? We look at the woman at the well. When Jesus spoke to the woman at the well, her being a Samaritan, of course, was surprised that a Jew would talk to her at all, make his request for water. But then she asked the question about where you say we should worship in Jerusalem, but our fathers worship here in this mountain, Mount Gerizim. And Jesus explained, well, we worship what we know, but you worship what you don't know. You don't understand. Okay. So there was a distinct difference in the understanding the worship between the Samaritans and the Jews. The Jews looked upon the Samaritans as they were perverting the law of Moses, and they were. Now, what's this all mean? I'm getting over that it was not mere racial bias against Samaritans. It wasn't it at all. It was because they had, it's like the closest I could compare, I suppose, was that as we consider with the Restoration movement to restore the Church of Christ that had been neglected because of, as the Bible talks about, that the false teachers would come in, they'd teach false doctrines, there'd be great falling away. And we can trace that through history after the first century, how things began to change, the doctrine began to change, the church fell away, generally speaking. And I know we go back to Daniel chapter 2, verse 44, where he says that the sovereignty of that nation shall never left between other people. That nation shall stand forever, shall last forever. We understand that. So as we consider, as a generalization, the church had fallen away from the doctrine of Christ. And it was during the times of Martin Luther that he began to see the discrepancies and would debate with the Catholic priests and the bishops, and successfully so. But this started the Protestant movement. They were protesting what the Catholic Church had become. It was such a digression from what the Scriptures taught. So they were trying to reform that church to bring it back to what it should be. It didn't happen. It wasn't reformed. But the Protestant movement had, because the Catholic Church was unmovable, they were sticking with the doctrine, that those that in their conscience, they went along with the denominational teaching. They didn't call it denominational, but they divided themselves from the Catholic Church. Well, if we were seeing the discrepancies between what the Catholic Church taught, and we knew it contrasted and contradicted the teachings of the Bible, what would we do? We'd sever our ties with the Catholic. I would think we would sever our ties with the Catholic Church, because we would strive to be right with God. Well, the Reformation was successful in as far as it went, but it didn't go all the way to bring back first century Christianity. There were still some doctrines that, and the various groups that were formed. Think about the Lutherans. Interestingly enough, Luther said, "Don't call yourself Lutherans. Call yourselves Christians." Well, as it was, man would follow his typical way, and they created a new group called Lutherans. And then you had the Presbyterians, you had the Episcopalians, you had and of course there's the Church of England as well. So you had these groups who were dividing themselves from the Catholic Church, protesting what it had become, but yet still dividing themselves from each other as well. So they were denominated, they were denoted, they were named after these various, whether it be after a person or whether it be after a principle. But so they tried to reform it, didn't work, and so they ended up with division anyway. So enter the later ages of the Restoration, where it was going on all over the world. It wasn't just happening. There was a point in which it became very prominent in the United States back in the mid-19th century. And the various men who were involved with the study and looking into Bible doctrine. And of course, many sayings came out of that, like we speak where the Bible speaks, and where the Bible is silent, we remain silent. Okay, or we name things, Bible things by Bible names, and we do Bible things in Bible ways. These kinds of thoughts came out of this. I say came out of it, were highlighted by the Restoration movement to try to restore the church of the first century. And so going to the Bible itself. So as all that to say this, how do we view the denominations then as compared to our striving to be the church that belongs to Christ, the church of the first century? We see the denominations as still wayward. They still, many of them believe perverted doctrine from the Bible. Okay, they have perverted it. We look at Galatians chapter 1, where Paul was amazed, he was marveling that they had so soon removed themselves from Christ and following after the teachings of those false teachers that had gone into Galatia. Particularly in this case in Galatia, it was regarding the Judaizing teachers. Those who were teaching that in order to become a Christian, you had to first become a Jew, basically, a proselyte, basically. You must first be circumcised, and so they were binding on this where the Lord has not bound it. Okay, and where Paul was exhorting them, don't do this. You're Gentiles. Okay, you don't need this. It's not required of you. And these are things that are being bound upon you that God does not bind. And so the same idea is that of the denominations, they will bind upon their members things that the Bible doesn't bind. And they're loose open to those members, those things where the Bible does not loose. Okay, so therein is their digression. They haven't come full swing to abide by the full doctrine of Christ. And different denominations have different areas where they differ from the teachings of the Bible. And so as we look at that, our wanting to operate entirely within the bounds of the Bible, the New Testament, particularly the new Christ's new will and testament, okay, last will and testament, you might say, in the sense of before his death, that we would abide by his doctrine to be his church, one body of believers among the whole world, yet different congregations. Okay, and so as we would look upon the denominations, we don't join them because we see the error of their ways. So it was with the Jew and the Samaritan. They wouldn't join themselves with Samaritans because they perverted the doctrine of God, the doctrine of the law of Moses. Now, all of this, then, so I'm all these tangents coming back to our topic here, where who is our neighbor? When Jesus spoke that word, that parable, because Jews had no dealings with Samaritans, because of the very issues that I just discussed over the past 10 or 15 minutes, that when he spoke the parable about the Good Samaritan, that the Samaritan was doing good things for this Jew, it was calculated, I believe, it was calculated to emphasize the very fact that who is my neighbor? Well, it's everyone around us, like you said. Everyone around us is our neighbor. And so as we think about love our neighbor as ourselves, so we do no evil to anyone. We do good only to anyone. We don't bear false witness. We don't covet their belongings. And if there be any other commandment, it's briefly comprehended in this saying. This is boil it all down to this. Namely, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. So we see that the law of Moses was indeed based upon love of God and love of neighbor. Just as today, the new law of Christ is based upon love of God and love of our neighbor. Okay. And so he continues with the thought, love worketh no ill to his neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. Okay. Now, he goes on to discuss about regarding what's this all mean then? In verse 11, and that, knowing the time that now is high time to awake out of sleep, for now is our salvation nearer than when we believed. It's high time. Or how does the American Standard render that, Kara? Verse 11.
That if the Spirit in him raised up Jesus from the...
Chapter 13, verse 11.
Sorry, I was back a minute ago.
Okay.
One man no man. Let me go to
Verse 11.
And this knowing the season, that already is time for you to awake out of sleep, for now is salvation nearer to us than when we first believed.
Okay. We need to be aware it's getting closer to the return of Christ. Now, what I didn't say is that Christ is coming soon. Will not say that because we just don't know. When his disciples asked in Matthew chapter 23 and 24, and 24 particularly, Jesus had related to them that after his disciples had shown and gave him basically just talked about the wonderful buildings in King Herod's temple area, the complex, Jesus said, there's coming a day where all these going to be knocked down. Every stone will be knocked down. And they marveled and said, when is this going to happen? So they asked him, when is this all that's going to happen? And what are the signs of this happening? And of the day of the end of the world? See, they associated all this stuff would be the last day that Christ would return and the end of the world. And so he went on to discuss about the signs that would lead up to the destruction of the temple and the destruction of the walls of Jerusalem. And he gave them signs about things that would event to warn them because it was going to happen in their day, in their lifetime. And as a matter of fact, the Christian, that was a teaching going around about be prepared, because the abomination of desolation, as Jesus put it, referring to Daniel, the prophecies of Daniel and the destruction of the temple, the abomination of desolation was coming. You see the signs, you get out of town because it's going to be horrendous. And so he warns them. And so that was the common teaching among the Christians of that day. And as Josephus recorded the history, when the Roman Empire encircled the city of Jerusalem to lay siege upon it, the Christians saw it for what it was. It was the sign that this is time. This is the judgment of Christ upon the city of Jerusalem that he gave in Matthew chapter 24, that the horrible things that would happen. And so, seeing that, when Titus removed himself from it for a short period of time to go take care of something else, the Christians saw the opportunity to leave. As Jesus said, except for the day be lengthened. I'm going to have to paraphrase this. Except for that this occur, the days be lengthened, no Christians no believers will escape. Well, Titus removed himself to take care of something else remotely, and so Christians took advantage of the opportunity and got out of town. As Josephus recorded, not a single Christian died in that event, but over 1 million Jews died violently, horrible deaths, and blood did run deep on the streets of Jerusalem. So, with that, but then he said, but of they in that hour, Matthew 24:36, but of that day no man knoweth. He was talking about that day being the last day, the final day of judgment, that when the world comes to an end, the time ceases, and all the powers be dissolved, all the civil authorities be dissolved, that no one knows. Not an angel, not even the Son of Man. That is himself. He didn't know. At that time, he didn't know when the day of judgment would come. So as we look at that, when I say that the time is closer now than when it was, as he said, as Paul wrote in chapter 13, verse 11, that knowing the time, that now is high time to awake out of sleep, for now is our salvation nearer than when we believed. When we first believed, because time is marching on. So ultimately, regardless of when Jesus comes, and we don't know when he's going to come, regardless, it's still getting closer to that day. as each day passes. And so Paul is now exhorting them to wake up, be aware of what's really going on. You know, we receive a multitude of blessings as children of God. A multitude. He provides for us in so many ways. And many Christians enjoy a great level of comfort and peace. Yes, Christ brings us peace. And with all these blessings, we can be lulled into a sense of we lose our, what's the word I'm looking for? We lose our urgency. We lose our sense of urgency. All around us, there's so many souls that are lost. Their ultimate destination is condemnation in hell forever and ever and ever. And they don't know it. They are literally lost in sin. They don't know how sin blinds them, and they don't know that they're lost, and they don't really perceive of the judgment that they're going to receive, and how extensive it is, and how awful it is. And they're all around us. And even ourselves, that we need to watch and pray. We need to be ready when Christ returns. That's why he told the parables he did in Matthew 25 regarding the preparations we need to have and be ready when Christ does return. And so that knowing the time, and that now is high time to wake out of sleep, we can't be lulled into a comfortable peace that we forget about our neighbor and the peril his soul faces, and even our own as well. Therefore, so as we said, for now is our salvation nearer than when we believed. We need to be waking up. Look at Ephesians 5:14. Wherefore he saith, Awake, thou that sleepest, and arise from the dead, and Christ shall give thee light. So then that ye walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. Redeeming is buying back the time, using the opportunities that we have, because the end is coming. It's getting closer. And not only is the fact that the end is coming closer, but it's a matter of opportunities. Sometimes opportunities are so fleeting, they're so temporary. Sometimes it's just we'll never have an opportunity to talk to this person again. Sometimes it's sometimes we have a period of months that we have opportunities to talk to somebody, and then the opportunities go away. And so as we consider being aware and realize the opportunities that we have, we need to buy up the time, redeem the time that we have, because the days are evil. So as we go back to Romans chapter 13. That we need to be aware of the time that it's running out. As he continues on, the night is far spent, the day is at hand. Let us therefore cast off the works of darkness, and let us put on the armor of light. So we as Christians, this is something that he's telling them that the current state of affairs, that they needed currently, that they need to cast off the works of darkness. And they needed to currently put on the armor of light. So it was the exhortation that it was a situation they were living in, that they needed to do this. Verse 13, let us walk honestly as in the day. And he's contrasting what many have degraded themselves to. We look at Romans chapter 1, but even just let us walk honestly as in the day, not in rioting and drunkenness, not in chambering and wantonness, not in strife and envying. All these things that honestly the world doesn't think much about. This is just a way of life. As far as rioting and drunkenness, these are wild parties, and then the chambering, the inappropriate, unchaste behavior between men and women in the privacy closed room and wantonness, not in strife and envying. All these things that the world involves themselves thinking it's just normal and trying to get ahead and trying to enjoy as though this is something that would help them enjoy life. And so we are to put all these things away and do what instead? But put ye on the Lord Jesus Christ, and make not provision for the flesh to fulfill the lust thereof. Now, we are to make provisions for the flesh in this sense. We make preparations to have what we need. We work to buy food. We make preparations we plant our gardens, our crops. We lay by and store to prepare for the needs that we'll have, we and our family will have. In that way, we do make provisions for the flesh in that sense. But we don't make provisions for the lusts of the flesh. We don't provide means by which we can dissipate. Okay, we can dissipate whatever we've worked for. Make not provision for the flesh to fulfill the lusts thereof. So yes, there are appetites that God has given us, and our being physical beings, but there are ways that are godly that satisfies those appetites. We should not seek out those ways that are ungodly to satisfy those appetites. Okay, I'd like you to turn to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Beginning in verse 4, the same ideas are being expressed here as we just read in Romans chapter 13. But ye, brethren, are not in darkness, that the day should overtake you as a thief. You're well informed. You've been given the truth. Christ has provided you the truth, and they should not be overtaken by the darkness and be deceived by Satan's ways. We're well aware of what goes on. Verse 5, ye are all the children of light and the children of the day. We are not of the night nor of darkness. If we're not of the darkness, what does that mean about our lifestyle? That's right. We don't do the things that the world does in the sense of satisfying their lusts in inappropriate ways, but rather we live as children of light according to the day. We are not of the night nor of darkness, therefore let us not sleep as do others, but let us watch and be sober. Same idea about it's high time. Be awake. Because the darkness is there, and we are not of the darkness, we are the daylight. But therefore let us not sleep as do others, let us watch and be sober. For they that sleep, sleep in the night, and they that be drunken are drunken in the night. So like the very things that the world does at night, we're not to do because we're of the day. And of course, he's not talking about every hour of the day. We have to have sleep. That's what he's talking about. It's like we just need to be aware. We need to be sober-minded. That is, we're thinking seriously and correctly about events, about things, and about our disposition before God and the world. Verse 8, but let us, who are of the day, be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love, and for an helmet the hope of salvation. So we're protecting ourselves in that sense from the wiles of the devil, the ways of the world, from the influence that the world will have upon us. And don't think that because we concentrate a lot on the Bible, and we ought to study the Bible, prepare our minds, put things in our minds, but that I cannot be influenced by the world. We are influenced by everything around us, whether it be whatever's the talking going on from the radio or the TV or whatever we're watching, whatever we fill our minds with, whatever we're driving down the road, seeing the billboards, or we go to the grocery store. The very things that are all around us will affect us, but we should be aware of that. We should watch and be sober. They that sleep, okay, let us who are of the day be sober, putting on the breastplate. So we protect ourselves in that sense, that we put on the breastplate of faith. It will when he relates the armor that a soldier would have to protect himself from the sword blows, the breastplate, that faith provides that breastplate protection for our heart. And love, faith and love put together. And for an helmet, the hope of salvation. So it protects our head. As for a soldier to receive blows to the head, that helmet of the hope of salvation would keep us thinking straight, protect our head from a blow like that. And of course, we understand this is all figuratively speaking, but yet as we consider what keeps us going as Christians, what keeps us walking faithfully as Christians, is our faith in Christ, in God, faith that it's what he says is really going to happen. We discussed briefly Wednesday night about Hebrews chapter 11, about that great hall of faith where men and women of the Old Testament were exhibited their faith by what they did. Okay, but that that faith motivated them and drove them to do what they did, and so it is with our faith. It is a protective device, as it were, and love, and for the helmet, the hope of salvation. Okay, and here's the point: for God hath not appointed us to wrath. We go back to Romans chapter 1, that the world, because it has purposely put away the knowledge of God, has purposely rejected God, they're in store for wrath. God's wrath will come upon them. His anger will come upon them, that the fact that he's their creator, and they reject him. Okay, and of course, living in sin as they do. But we, as Christians, having received forgiveness of our sins, God has set us apart from all that. We are delivered from that. We're delivered from that wrath because of his grace and his mercy and the great thing that Christ has done for us, that we are set aside. We are not set for that wrath. Rather, we are but to obtain salvation by our Lord Jesus Christ. And that's our hope. That's what we have to look forward to. And he goes on to discuss about what how our salvation is obtained by the Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, that whether we wake or sleep, we should live together with him. Wherefore comfort yourselves together and edify one another, even as also ye do. So they were encouraging one another already, but here they were exhorted to, given that, continue to do that. Continue to be exhorting one another and encouraging one another, edifying one another, because that helps what keeps us going. When we come together on Sundays or Wednesdays, the fact that we share this fellowship with like-minded brethren, having a like faith, that we encourage one another to keep on going on, to remain faithful to God, because there is coming a day where we're going to be so glad we did. We're going to be so glad. Several things. Number one, that we ever had an opportunity to hear the truth. That somebody talked to us and taught us the truth about what's really going to happen in the last day. And that, number two, we decided to take advantage of that, and in our belief, we've changed our way of life so that we do walk after Christ. We do walk in the light. We are children of the day, okay? So that we will be so grateful in that day, okay, when that happens. And as we look upon those, if we're able to see how we will see so many who have rejected Christ, rejected God, and we see their judgment, we'll be so grateful that I missed that. Okay. And so we edify one another as we come together, and it motivates us to continue being faithful, because one day it's going to be, we'll be thankful for all our brethren who have worked to help us, to encourage us. Okay. Verse 12, and we beseech you, brethren, to know them which labor. Okay, so we'll stop there. I start getting off in the 1 Thessalonians. So back to Romans chapter 13. The exhortation to put you on the Lord Jesus Christ and make not provision for the flesh to fill the lust thereof. So we should be aware of what's going on. We should be motivated and encouraging the brethren, encouraging all, and keep our eye out for somebody who will be seeking the truth, that perhaps they will find everlasting life as well. Any thoughts regarding this or comments? What we discussed it all this morning? Okay. I appreciate your attention. I know I was talking most of the time, but I appreciate your attention. So next week we'll begin with chapter 14, Romans chapter 14, and continuing the book. Thank you for your attention. Bye.